Hello students. In this video we're going to take a look at another type of function called the round function. This function should be available to you in most of the spreadsheet applications that you're using. I'm using Google Sheets. I know that it is available there, and I do know that it is available in Excel. Most of the spreadsheets I've used do have a round function, so regardless of what you're using, you should be able to follow along in this video. This video is really only going to cover the round function because there is a slight difference between it and some of the other functions that we've already seen, and so I wanted to spend some time looking at some of the issues that surface when using a function like the round function. Also, too, it has a very different format than the sum, average, min, and max functions, which you should have already seen by now. So I wanted to give you the opportunity to see a different style of function so that you're not thrown when we take a look at other functions as well that have a different style. So let's take a look at the round function in this spreadsheet. Here's my test spreadsheet. I have just some generic information here. I have a list of months you can see here in column B, which by the way I used my fill handle to create. If you haven't looked at the fill handle video yet, you may want to check that one out. And then I just assign some random mileages. So this could be a spreadsheet for someone that drives and they want to keep track of their mileage every month. Now let's say we wanted to actually calculate the average number of miles that this person was driving in a particular month. We could simply create a label called average, and as we've seen already in previous videos, we could type in the average function and we could select the range over which we want the average, and we could hit enter. Now if you take a look at this average, you notice it's not very pretty. It is 109, we can see that, but the decimal portion of it is rather long, and so it doesn't look very pretty. Now there's a couple ways of handling this, and I just want to walk you through this. The first thing that we could do is we could have the spreadsheet hide some of those decimal places. As you may have come across already, there are a number of ways to display your values, and one of the things that we can do is choose how many decimal places that we have. Now I'm using Google Sheets. If you use Microsoft Excel, this will be slightly different. But if I want to format my value with a different number of decimal places, I could certainly do that. So let's say I want to just have that displayed with 2 decimal places. Now I could do that. Now it looks as if the value has now been rounded. If we took that out, if I undid that action, you'll notice that if I did round this to the nearest 100th place, it would not round it up to 0.09 because we have 3's there, so it should round down to the 0.08, and when I apply that again, we can see that that happened. However, the important thing to note here is this actually did not round my value. All it did was change its display. If I were to use this value in a calculation, it would actually use the value underneath. It would not use this displayed value. It would actually use the value underneath. Let's test that. Let's say I wanted to take this value and add 1 to it. Take a look. Notice that when I add 1 to that particular value, let me show you the formula again just in case you missed that. I basically just took C16 and added 1, and when I did that, you'll notice my result was 110.083 repeating. Here it only displays 109.08, but when I added the 1 to it, you notice it pulled the whole value that was stored underneath the cell and used that in the calculation. That's important to note, because as we get to the round function, what we're going to see is it actually is going to affect the value in our cell. So one way to kind of change the display a little bit is to alter the way the formatting of the cell works, but we have to remember that we're not really changing the value in the cell. So let's take a look at the round function and see how that will differ. The round function is going to start. You don't have to type that label if you don't want to. I'm just going to do that for your display purposes. As we start the round function, we just type round, and you'll notice in Google Sheets at least we have a couple different options. We're going to focus on the first option here, round. And the first thing I want you to note is the format of the function. When we were working with the sum, the average, the min, and the max, the formatting was pretty much the same, except for the name of the function. You had a set of parentheses, just like you see here, but we had different values separated by commas listed in the parentheses, and you could add as few or as many references as you wished. The round function is slightly different. The round function expects only two things from you that we can see here, a number and a count. So we need to understand what it is these values are so that the function works appropriately. In any spreadsheet application now, you'll get some help from the application, and here we can see in Google Sheets that this is going to round the given number, and that's the value given by number. It's going to round it to a certain number of decimal places according to valid mathematical criteria. And basically what that means is it's going to round the way we would normally round in math. And it's going to round to a certain number of decimal places. Well, how many decimal places? That's a good question to ask. Let's keep reading. Count, which is optional, is the number of places to which the value will be rounded. So the count value, the second value in the list, is going to determine how many decimal places I will get, or to which decimal place I will round. Now it says here, and this is important to note, we'll test this out in a little bit, if the count parameter is negative, so if this value count is negative, only the whole number portion is rounded. And I'll get to that in a little bit. Let's take a look at this in a very generic way. Let's say I wanted to round my number to the nearest hundredth. So I wanted 2 decimal places, just like I have up here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to add my parentheses, and then I'm going to choose the number that I want to average, or I'm sorry, I want to round. Now, this could be just a number, this could be a cell reference, and it could also be a calculation, and I'll show you that a little bit later, but you'll notice here I'm just going to click on the average in C17 or C16. I've already calculated the average, it's already there, so I'm just going to use that cell reference there. Now that's the number that I want rounded. After that, I have to put a comma, and then I have to enter the decimal places that I want in my rounded number. So in this particular case, I want to round to the nearest hundredth place, so I want 2 decimal places, and therefore since I want 2 decimal places, I'm going to add the value 2. Alright, let me move my mouse there so you can see. And then I'm going to close that off, and when I hit enter, you'll notice I get the same value that's displayed in C16. Now the reason why I'm getting the same value is because this appears to be rounded to the nearest hundredth, and this I used the round function for to round to the nearest hundredth. But remember what happened before. Let me take you back to what we did before. Before, what I did is I took this calculation, or this average, and I added 1 to it, and you noticed that the decimal values were still there. Even though I chose to format this with only 2 decimal places, it didn't actually remove the underlying value. But if I take this value and add 1, you'll notice that I actually only get this value plus 1. Instead of 109.08, I get 110.08. You'll notice here that this value has now been rounded. So if I use it in a calculation, I'm actually using the rounded value. That's important to note. So if we do want the rounded value here in the cell, we have to use the round function. If we only want to display our value differently, but we want to retain the actual value, of our calculation, then we can use the formatting options that we saw before. So that's fairly important to note. Now, let's take a look at this round function a little bit closer. The 2 was fairly easy. What if I rounded to only one decimal place? So we could just change that 2 to a 1, and we should be able to anticipate what the rounded value is going to be. If we were rounding to the nearest hundredth and we got 109.08, rounding to the nearest tenth should give us 109.1. So let's take a look and make sure that that works. Yes, it does. And again, notice my formula over here updated itself as well. What if I only wanted to round to the nearest whole number? What if I didn't want any decimal places at all? Well, if I want no decimal places, then I really want 0 decimal places. So instead of a 1, I could put a 0. And that will cause this to be rounded to the nearest whole number. Again, notice my formula over here updates as well. Here's where it gets interesting though. What if I want to round to the nearest tens place? Now the tens place is to the left of the decimal point. What do I do then? Right now I have it set to 0, so there's no decimals. Well, this is where the negative issue came in as we were reading that description. If you want to round to a position left of the decimal place, you have to work your way into the negatives. So since 0 is the nearest whole number, 0 decimal places, the nearest tens place would actually be rounded to by putting a negative 1 in there. If you think about it, we're moving down the number line into the negative area. If I do that, then I will get my value rounded to the nearest tens place. To round to the nearest tens place, I look at the 9 in the whole number place, in the ones place, and it's going to round it up to the nearest tens place. What about to the nearest hundreds place? Well, in that case, I'm moving again over another position, so instead of negative 1, I'm actually going to choose negative 2. And we can see here that that rounds appropriately to the nearest hundreds place. So the rounding function is very powerful. You can round a value to a number of decimal places that you wish. Even if I wanted 5 decimal places, I could do that, and it will give me that. And it's important to note that if we want to work to the left of the decimal point, then we do need to work into the negatives. So you'll just need to remember that. Now, last thing before we're done, I want to also show you that instead of just a cell reference here or a value, I can actually use a calculation. Anything that evaluates to a number can be placed here. So let's say I did not have, let me escape that. Let's say I don't even have this anymore. I'm going to delete this whole row. Now my function is off. You notice it took the cell reference out. What if I didn't even have that average in there? Well, what I could do is I could type average, and I could calculate my average the way I normally do. But you'll notice the average calculation is inside the round calculation. That's fairly tricky. Okay, take a good look at that. Pause the video if you need to take a look at that structure. We're starting with a round, right? And we have to tell the spreadsheet what we want to round. And we're telling it to round whatever it calculates to be the average of C3 to C14. So what Excel or what Google Sheets here in this case is going to do, what your spreadsheet is going to do, is it's going to first calculate the average. It goes inside the parentheses first. And then whatever it calculates that to be, it's going to replace it with, or it's going to insert it here, and then it will round that value to however many decimal places you chose. So in this particular case, we're going to round that average to 5 decimal places. If I wanted it to the nearest whole number, again, put in a 0, and we're all set.